Peter Schiff, who we just played that video of them making fun of him, laughing at him weeks before, a month before, on all these shows, CNBC, you name it, saying that they were going to have tapering, and he said, no, they're not. And I, of course, agreed with him, and many others did, but the mainstream media totally disagreed with him. We're going to get him to talk about that prediction that came true, like most of his predictions do, unfortunately. I wish he was wrong about stuff because it's scary. And then what he sees in the future, the government shutdown, all of it, with Peter Schiff here in just a moment. First off, some of the headlines up on Infowars.com. Uncontrollable laughing or crying? You might need an SSRI. The drug companies write the psychological guidelines now, so if you laugh a lot, well, that's a mental illness. Obamacare, day 4, users still can't log in. Mission accomplished, destroy the economy, Cloward and Piven. FBI cordon off neighborhood to search executed driver's condo for anti-government material. Don't find any. And no weapons, so they can't blame libertarians. We have video of Obama supporters who don't know what party he's in. Every one of them but one lady. This is the mind of total ignorance and slaves. That is just some of what we're going to be breaking down. Also, getting into the government shutdown, they've now wired shut and barricaded the World War II memorial that's been privately paid for and administered, just like Mount Vernon. Military keeps Camp David open, halts NFL baseball coverage to the troops. Park Service tries shutting down privately run inn. A ranger goes public, says, we've been told to make life as difficult for people as we can. It's disgusting. He'll get audited or fired. Debt ceiling fight, dates to founding fathers. That's some of the news up on drudgereport.com. So that's the news we'll be breaking down after Peter Schiff leaves us at 50 after. And then we've got Dr. Steve Pachinik coming on to talk about geopolitics on this Friday edition. Peter, thanks for coming on. I know you're a busy guy. So much happening. Let's get into your prediction where you said on record they're not going to taper, and they laughed at you and attacked you. How were you so sure?
Well, remember, Alex, I first started saying there would be no taper the day that Ben Bernanke first discussed it. So I knew he was bluffing from the beginning. And in fact, Ben Bernanke never actually came out and said, we're going to taper. He always said, depending on the data. So he left himself an out. And even though he knew the market was expecting a taper, and all these Fed officials kept coming out talking about taper, they did nothing to diffuse that expectations, because their real plan is to try to pretend that there's a way out of this, that they have an exit strategy, that they can taper when they know it's impossible, because the entire phony recovery that they're basing the ability to taper on will go away the minute they taper. The whole, they can't taper without destroying the economy. But unfortunately, if they don't taper, eventually they destroy the economy anyway, even worse.
That's right. Break down for the layperson out there what tapering is, what QE Unlimited is, and give us your forecast on where you see the world economy going.
Well, right now, the Federal Reserve has got interest rates at 0 because we have so much debt. That's the highest we can afford to pay. And the Federal Reserve is buying $85 billion worth of U.S. Treasuries and mortgage debt every month. In fact, it's actually over $90 billion because the Fed is reinvesting the interest it earns on the bonds and mortgages that it already owns. And because the Fed is buying all this debt, that makes it possible for the government to sell the debt without interest rates going up. That's the only thing keeping this house of cards economy going. But if Ben Bernanke takes away even some of that support, interest rates will rise beyond our ability to afford it. In fact, in his press conference, when he didn't taper, he told everybody that the reason he wasn't doing that was because rates had gone up, and he didn't want rates to go up anymore. But the reason rates went up is because he threatened to taper. But now because he threatened to taper, he can't actually carry out the threat, because tapering means higher interest rates. Now, of course, eventually interest rates are going to skyrocket when the dollar crashes, and then, then this party's over.
You have accurately, in the decade plus I've been listening and watching your work and having you on the show, and also tune in when I can to Schiff Radio that you do almost every day, breaking down where we're going, and then over and over again, you've turned out to be accurate. Give us an idea on where the economy is now in specifics and what you expect to happen by the middle of next year.
Well, where it is now, it's a disaster in the making. It's a gigantic bubble. We're in worse shape economically than we were just before the '08 financial crisis. I mean, we're in worse shape than we were in at the peak of the NASDAQ bubble in 2000. We're in worse shape than we were going into the Great Depression in the 1930s. So it is a complete disaster. That is why the powers in Washington at the Fed are doing everything they can to postpone the day of reckoning, because we've got a lot to reckon with. But the problem is, the longer they postpone it, the worse the problems are going to be, because we make them bigger when we postpone them. So now it's going to be even worse. Now, whether the chickens come home to roost by the middle of next year or not, it's hard to say. You know, we've got this manufactured debt ceiling crisis coming up. If they don't raise the debt ceiling, then we're going to have a crisis sooner, because the minute we can't go deeper into debt, then we've got to admit that we're broke, and then we're going to have a big problem. But what they're probably going to do is increase the debt ceiling and postpone the problem. But, you know, when President Obama comes out and says we have to raise the debt ceiling because America always pays his bills, he's lying. The reason we have to raise the debt ceiling is because we never pay our bills. That's why we've got $17 trillion in debt. We need to raise the debt ceiling so we can borrow more money instead of paying our bills. In fact, the president lied more. He gave a speech yesterday, and he actually said that raising the debt ceiling doesn't increase the debt, that it doesn't lead to more debt, when that's exactly what it does. We can only borrow more money if we raise the debt ceiling. And that's exactly what we're going to do, because paying our bills is impossible. So we have to borrow money and hope nobody figures out how broke we are. But of course, we keep telling everybody how broke we are. They got to figure it out eventually. And then it's not about our willingness to borrow. It's about the world's willingness to lend. And when the world doesn't want to lend anymore, then that's it.
Now understanding this for, again, the common person out there, I almost don't want to ask you what you would do as a solution, because we know they're not going to do that. They're going to keep driving the ship in the same direction. But briefly, what would you do to try to reverse this or mitigate it? Can it be mitigated, A, but B, more importantly, because we know they're not going to listen to you or other sound economists or minds that are following real free market economics. They're following this crony system where this mafia just won't give it up and admit they're wrong because it enriches them. Where is it really going? What will it look like? How bad will it be with 101 million people in the U.S. on some form of food assistance?
Yeah, well, look, it can be mitigated, but only if we deal with it sooner rather than later, and if we apply market-oriented solutions to the problem, not government solutions. But it's still going to hurt. Look, I want to rip the Band-Aid off quickly. Right now, they're peeling it off slowly. I mean, obviously, it's going to hurt for a second if we rip the Band-Aid off, but we've got to do it. You know, so what we've got to do is go cold turkey on all this debt. It means the Fed has to stop quantitative easing and start selling the bonds it holds. It has to allow interest rates to rise to a market level. And when that happens, we're going to have to deal with the fact that we're broke. That means we can't pay back all the money that we've promised. People are going to take losses. Government promised a lot of things to a lot of people. It can't keep these promises. So a lot of people are going to be disappointed. Some banks are going to fail. We can't bail them out. Some companies are going to fail. Some people are going to lose their jobs. Unfortunately, this has to happen. But people have to lose the wrong jobs so they can get the right jobs. Our economy is so screwed up right now based on years and years of artificially low interest rates. We consume too much. We borrow too much. We don't save enough. We don't produce enough. We have huge trade deficits. These are unsustainable. They need to be corrected. The correction involves some short-term pain. But if we can couple that with significant tax relief and spending reductions and sound money, then we can make the bitter-tasting medicine go down a little smoother. But more importantly, it'll work. We'll be able to create a real lasting recovery that will benefit everybody. If we keep numbing the pain with government stimulus, the disease gets worse, and ultimately it's going to be fatal.
An analogy of this is people like organic food, high-quality food. They start buying it, and then over time, everybody starts buying it, so it actually brings more competition in, and then organic food prices go way down from what they were just 15 years ago. That's how a free market, voting with dollars, changes things. But by select insiders having unlimited trillions to put into areas they want, it destroys competition, enriches groups that aren't competitive, and really screws up the society and creates, I think, the type of mass degeneration we see happening. But, Peter, let me ask you this question. If we've got 50 million people on food stamps, roughly, 100+ million on food assistance, half the public on government dependency one way or the other. What is going to happen? This is the biggest, most wrecked government in history, according to my research. Correct me if I'm wrong from your perspective. And I'm really worried because the collectivists with Cloward and Piven say they just want to collectivize things. It's their plan to wreck things and then have the answer be total government. We may be looking at a Soviet Union-style event here where they absolutely put you and I, you know, to work on some type of forced labor or something.
Well, that is the slippery slope that we're on. Those are the dangers of democracy that our founding fathers warned us about when they gave us a republic and challenged us to keep it. Unfortunately, we didn't meet that challenge. And yes, there are a significant number of voters who are bought and paid for by the government. They're voting for benefits. They're voting for theft. And anybody who threatens to take away what's being stolen and redistributed to them is going to lose. But I don't know if we've hit the critical mass yet. We still have a significant number of Americans who are working for a living and paying all the taxes. I know our numbers are diminishing every day as the government makes it more lucrative to jump into the cart and stop pulling it. But we have to do something quickly before we're totally outnumbered. And of course, you know, everybody has been educated or indoctrinated in government schools. The electorate is not that bright, unfortunately, in the United States, and they're easily taken in by these left-wing promises of prosperity flowing from government, when the only thing that has ever worked at creating prosperity, particularly for the poor and the middle class, is freedom, is capitalism. It's not a government program or a handout that makes people rich. It's the freedom of entrepreneurs to come up with ideas and then implement those ideas by creating businesses that produce the goods and services that we all enjoy and provide the employment opportunities that we need to be able to afford them.
We have the head of Euro-Pacific Capital, Peter Schiff, with us. He's also a syndicated talk show host here on the network with us today. Peter, I want to look at the big picture here because you just alluded to it. They are delivering 7,000 plus armored vehicles to local police. They are buying millions of rounds of ammo. The Army manuals that came out a month ago from Judicial Watch actually say the Founding Fathers were bad. The Park Service has been ordered to be mean to people during the shutdown. Jerry Brown's announced driver's license for illegal aliens and says they're going to flood the country and bring in Cloward and Piven. They are consciously trying to bankrupt things. What do we do when we're facing organized criminal government?
Well, this whole shutdown is being orchestrated to try to convince Americans that the worst thing that can happen is that the government shuts down. I mean, in fact, it would be great if the government actually was shut down. Unfortunately, so much of the government is still operating. That is our problem. And the problem is the shutdown is temporary. They're going to start it all back up again. And they're also trying to create this false sense of fear that if we don't raise the debt ceiling, that the economy is going to collapse, as if our prosperity depends on ever-increasing debt, when it's the opposite. What we really need is to shut down the government, to stop borrowing money so that we can free up the country. But yeah, you're right. I mean, this is going to be very difficult. I do fear that the situation that they are going to produce could lead to civil unrest. It could lead to martial law. It could lead to price controls with runaway inflation and shortages of basic necessities like food and energy. And yeah, and then what is the government going to be doing with all that ammunition?
Peter, in closing here, I wanted to bring up what the IMF's head just said in the Financial Times of London this morning, that they're facing an epic scale challenge and worldwide decline in growth. Her answer, of course, is more government, more taxes, more regulations, and then she's exempt from those taxes, famously under EU rules. What is she getting at there?
Well, this is what governments do. This is what the statists do. They inject themselves into the free market. They screw things up. And now you have problems. And now they say, you see, capitalism doesn't work. We need more government because capitalism has failed, because we have all these problems. And they don't accept responsibility for having caused those problems. The real solution is to unwind government's involvement in the free market so that the free market can fix the problems that the government created. That's what the free market does. It improves the standard of living for everybody. It increases the abundance of resources and consumer goods. It raises our standard of living.
And that's a historical fact, but I've had communist and socialist and government people tell me point blank they know that. privately, but they want control. When are people going to understand? These aren't bleeding heart, well-meaning liberals and neocons that work with them. These are people that see their empire growing through government. They're gangsters. Yeah. They're not producers.
That's the problem, is freedom and capitalism appeals to your intellect. What these snake oil salesmen are peddling from the left, socialism, appeals to greed and envy, emotion. They tug at your heartstrings. That's what it's all about. But anybody that stops and think, anybody that can rationally analyze what's going on, understands where wealth is coming from. And what destroys wealth, where the roadblocks to prosperity come from. But unfortunately, yes, there are people that want power, and the easy path to power is to promise something for nothing and blame the greedy capitalists for everybody's problems, because they know that's the easiest way to get at that voter's emotions, get at his greed, get at his envy, tug at his heartstrings, and get elected. And it's a difficult message, because the conservatives, the libertarians, they have to win the minds of the voters, and that's a lot more difficult than their emotions.
You're right. SchiffRadio.com. Peter Schiff, economist, joins us, very accurate with his predictions, being laughed at, but you notice he was smiling during those interviews because he knew the fix was in. We got about 45 seconds left. Let me ask you this. Are we in a deep global recession, or is it really a depression, and is it getting worse?
Well, I think the U.S. has been in depression or recession the entirety of the Obama presidency. I think it's going to be a depression, but it's not going to be global. I think when the dollar collapses and the rest of the world stops wasting all their resources, propping up our economy, buying our debt, selling us products that we can't pay for, I think you're going to have a global economic boom outside the United States. I just hope one day we're smart enough to join in on it by adopting some of the free market principles.
I agree. Is this the end of the American empire then?
Well, I think temporarily, yes. Is it the end forever? I hope not. I hope we can reclaim our former glory. But to do that, we're going to have to reclaim the values that we abandoned. And those are the ones that the founding fathers wrote into our Constitution, not the ones that we're following now.
An empire of liberty and ideas, not of force. God bless you. Thank you, Peter Schiff. We'll be right back with breaking news.